Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Saudi Arabia says Israel's unilateral moves with regards to settlements in the West Bank are hindering chances for peace in the Middle East. Speaking in Berlin, Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud said the kingdom is committed to peace on the basis of the 2002 Arab Peace Plan. These are Saudi Arabia's first official comments since the United Arab Emirates signed a deal to normalize ties with Israel on the 13th of August. Indian troops have martyred another youth in the occupied Kashmir. The civilian was martyred during a joint army and police operation in Mulu area of the Shopian district. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office said the global community must pressure India to lift the year-long draconian curfew in Kashmir. The European Union says it will soon impose sanctions on those involved in electoral fraud and repression of the protests in Belarus. Speaking after a virtual summit of the EU leaders, the European Council chief Charles Michel said the bloc doesn't recognize the results of the August 9 presidential election. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko said Western countries should focus on their own issues instead of interfering in his country's internal matters. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has been forced to resign after military detained him and Prime Minister Boubou Sese in a coup. In a televised address, Keïta said he has dissolved the parliament to avoid bloodshed in the country. The military said that they have a plan to form a civilian transitional government that will hold fresh elections. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 deaths and over 47,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, while the US has recorded more than 1,200 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 171,000 with nearly 5.5 million infections. India has recorded the highest daily death toll of 1,092, taking the total to nearly 53,000 with more than 2.7 million infected. In Pakistan, 11 deaths since yesterday have taken the toll to 6,201, with case load of above 290,000 infections. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22 million people and claimed more than 779,000 lives. And in football, Paris Saint-Germain outclassed RB Leipzig by 3-0 to reach the final of the Champions League at Stadio de Luche. In their first Champions League final, the Parisians will face either Lyon or Bayern Munich on Sunday. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. Saudi Arabia says Israel's unilateral moves with regards to the settlements in the West Bank are hindering chances for peace in the Middle East. Speaking in Berlin, Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud said the kingdom is committed to peace on the basis of the 2002 Arab Peace Plan. These are Saudi Arabia's first official comments since the UAE signed a deal to normalize ties with Israel on the 13th of August. Earlier, senior White House advisor Jared Kushner said it would be in Riyadh's interest to formally establish ties with Israel. Other Islamic countries, including Turkey and Iran, have denounced the UAE-Israel deal. As part of the agreement, Israel agreed to suspend the annexation of territories in the occupied West Bank. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had only agreed to a delay and that the plan was not off the table in the long run. Palestinians have condemned the move, seeing it as a betrayal of their cause by the UAE. The agreement is only the third such accord Israel has struck with an Arab country after Egypt and Jordan. Israeli warplanes have attacked the Gaza Strip in another night of intense violence. No casualties have been reported from the raids so far. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military compound in retaliation to a rocket and explosive balloons. Eyewitnesses say at least 2 airstrikes hit a point belonging to the Izz-ad-Din al-Qasim brigade in southeastern Gaza. This is Israel's 8th consecutive strike on Hamas as tensions have been rising for over a week. Israel has also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. Sudan has fired its foreign ministry spokesman following remarks he made concerning contacts between Khartoum and Israel. Spokesman Haider Sadiq had praised the UAE's decision to normalize relations with Israel, saying it was a bold step. He said the move contributes to putting the Arab world on the right track to achieve peace in the region. Sudan's foreign ministry said it was astonished by its spokesman's remarks. The ministry stressed that the government had not discussed the possibility of diplomatic relations. The statement came after a meeting between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and head of Sudan's Transitional Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, in Uganda. Pakistan says it will never recognize the state of Israel until a just and fair solution to the Palestinian issue. In an interview, Prime Minister Imran Khan said accepting Israel is equivalent to giving up Pakistan's stance on Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Khan said the Palestine issue is similar to Kashmir, as their rights have been snatched while they suffer from Israeli atrocities. He said Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah made it clear in 1948 that Israel cannot be recognized under these circumstances. Khan debunked rumors that Pakistan's relations with Saudi Arabia have deteriorated, saying Islamabad has fraternal ties with Riyadh. Indian troops have martyred another youth in occupied Kashmir. The civilian was martyred during a joint army and police operation in the Mulu area of Shopian district. Indian forces have martyred nearly 220 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked Article 370 and stripped the region of its autonomy in August last year. Occupied Kashmir has been under a strict curfew and communications blackout since then. Hundreds of politicians and civil society activists have also been detained by the occupation forces. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office said the global community must ask India to lift the year-long draconian curfew in Kashmir. The European Union says it will soon impose sanctions on those involved in electoral fraud and repression of the protests in Belarus. Speaking after a virtual summit of the EU leaders in Brussels, European Council Chief Charles Michel said the bloc doesn't recognize the results of the August 9 presidential election.
Belarus has been rocked by days of violent protests over the alleged rigging in the presidential election. President Alexander Lukashenko denies the accusations, citing official results that gave him just over 80% of the vote. But EU leaders have expressed their full support for the Belarusian people, who want Lukashenko to resign and a re-election in the country. In an emergency meeting in Brussels, they called for a fresh election in Belarus. The European Commission also pledged 53 million euros to support the Belarusian people, while Lukashenko said Western countries should focus on their own issues instead of interfering in his country's internal matters. Earlier, he ordered authorities to quell the protests in Minsk and increase security at the country's western border.
Russia says it is concerned that the protests in Belarus are being used for foreign meddling in Belarusian affairs. In a statement, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said statements from the Western countries show their interests lie behind the election. Earlier, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said it saw no need for Russia to help Belarus militarily for now amid the ongoing unrest. He said the situation in Belarus is an internal matter that should be resolved by the Belarusians themselves. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has been forced to resign after the military detained him and Prime Minister Boubou says in a coup. In a televised address, Keïta said he has dissolved the parliament to avoid bloodshed in the country. The military said they plan to form a civilian transitional government which will hold fresh elections. Details in this report.
After months of violent protests in the country, Mali's military detained the president and prime minister. The protest movement accused Keita of corruption and worsening the security situation in the north and central regions. The opposition coalition says the ouster is not a mutiny, but a popular insurrection of the corrupt. Ex-President Keita says he had no choice but to step down.
Officier.
If today it pleased some elements of our armed forces to conclude that it should end with their intervention, do I really have a choice? Because I do not wish for any bloodshed to be spilled to keep me in office. That is why I wish right now, whilst thanking the people of Mali for joining me throughout these long years with warmth and affection, to announce my decision to resign from this moment.
In Bamako, hours of uncertainty followed after Keita's detention. The soldiers mutinied in the morning at the Kati military base where Keita was taken and rounded up a number of senior civilian officials and military officers. The dissolution of the government was followed by mass celebrations in Bamako's Independence Square. France and regional powers have condemned the ouster, while the UN has demanded an immediate and unconditional release of the president. The UN Security Council has also called an urgent meeting today to discuss the situation in Mali.
Syria says several rockets exploded in the premises of a U.S. military base in the north of Deir ez-Zor governorate. State media said the attack targeted the U.S. base near the Konoko oil field controlled by the U.S. and Kurdish troops. This is the first ever attack on one of the 12 military facilities created by the United States since 2015 in Syria's 3 governorates. No casualties have been reported so far. Meanwhile, Russia says its army general has been killed in a roadside bomb blast in Deir ez-Zor, while 3 servicemen are wounded. Earlier, unidentified jets bombed several towns in rebel-held northwestern Idlib in a new flare-up of violence. Iraq says it has killed 10 ISIS militants in an operation in the northern Karachok mountain. In a statement, Iraqi military says it conducted a joint operation with the coalition forces. It said 9 caves used by the militants were also destroyed in the operation. The operation comes as ISIS has intensified attacks on the security forces, including Hashd al-Shabi forces. Militants gained full control in Mosul, Saladin and Nambar provinces and seized territories in Diyala and Kirkuk provinces in 2014. But Iraqi security forces managed to regain the control in subsequent years. In the U.S., the Democratic Party has formally nominated Joe Biden as a presidential candidate at the largely virtual National Convention. Biden called the nomination a lifetime honor with his acceptance speech scheduled for Thursday. During the 4-day event, Democrats vouched for Biden's candidacy, vowing to heal a divided nation. The convention's second night was held under the theme of Leadership Matters. Former Presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, rising Democrats and notable Republicans said Biden will return integrity to the White House. The speakers criticized U.S. President Donald Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and his willingness to corrupt democratic institutions.
At a time like this, the Oval Office should be a command center. Instead, it's a storm center. There's only chaos. Just one thing never changes: his determination to deny responsibility and shift the blame. The buck never stops there. Now you have to decide whether to renew his contract or hire someone else.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has postponed the trade talks with China over Beijing's unthinkable handling of COVID-19. Speaking in Arizona, Trump said he is not interested in holding a dialogue with Beijing at the moment. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He were scheduled to conduct a 6-month review of the trade agreement last week before it was indefinitely postponed. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said no new high-level talks have been scheduled between Washington and Beijing. When asked if he will pull out of the trade deal, Trump said he had not made a decision before taking a swipe at Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. A U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee says Russia did influence the 2016 presidential election to help Donald Trump's campaign. The Republican-led panel released its 5th and final report on its probe into election interference. The report says WikiLeaks played a key role in the meddling and very likely knew it was assisting Russian intelligence. It alleged former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort worked with the Russians, including oligarch Oleg Deripaska. The report claims President Vladimir Putin personally directed Russian hacking efforts to breach computer networks affiliated with the Democratic Party. It stops short of accusing the Trump campaign of colluding with Moscow to sway the election.
This report is 1,000 pages long, twice as long as the Mueller report. I would urge every American to read it, to draw their own conclusions. Unprecedented amount of Russian intervention and a myriad of contacts with individuals affiliated and associated with the Trump campaign.
The U.S. says it has informed Russia of its terms for extending a landmark treaty that limits their deployed strategic nuclear weapons. Talking to reporters, U.S. negotiator Marshall Billingsley said now the ball is in Russia's court on the 2010 new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Billingsley said those terms include addressing Moscow's buildup of shorter-range nuclear weapons that are not covered by the treaty. This comes after U.S. envoy the latest round of talks in Vienna with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. Ryabkov said Russia stands for the extension of the START treaty but is not ready to pay any price for that. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu discussed strengthening trust measures in a phone call with the U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. The outgoing U.S. Chargé d'Affaires to Pakistan, Ambassador Paul W. Jones, has hailed Pakistan's effort for peace in the region. In a farewell meeting with Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa, the ambassador also appreciated Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process. General Bajwa thanked the diplomat for his services in Pakistan. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 deaths and over 47,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, while the U.S. has recorded more than 1,200 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 171,000 with nearly 5.5 million infections. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.1 million people and claimed more than 780,000 lives. More in this report.
Thousands are dying and getting infected worldwide daily by the new coronavirus as governments scramble to secure vaccine deals. Brazil has approved the final stage trials for Johnson & Johnson's experimental vaccine, the fourth to get a nod for testing in the country. In Argentina, government has reimposed lockdowns in parts of the country as cases tally crossed 305,000. Mexican health officials say the virus is on a steady decline in the country after reporting a drop in fatalities during the past week.
The trend is clear. Some indicators I will comment on in the slides consistently show the number of daily cases are decreasing, including the numbers of deaths, which have been very unfortunate, each and every one of them, but they have been in sustained decline for more than 6 weeks. Hospitalization have also decreased.
In Europe, the second wave is surging in many countries as governments reimpose lockdowns. Over in Australia, the government has secured a deal with British drug maker AstraZeneca for a potential vaccine, saying free doses will be provided to the public. While WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus says the world needs to prevent vaccine nationalism.
It's critical that countries don't repeat the same mistakes. We need to prevent vaccine nationalism. And for this reason, WHO is working with governments and the private sector to both accelerate the science through the ACT Accelerator and ensure that new innovations are available to everyone, everywhere, starting with those at highest risk.
Mainland China has reported a further decline in cases with no new domestic transmissions, but only 17 imported new cases. In South Korea, the daily cases have hit a 5-month high with 297 infections being reported in the past 24 hours.
Pakistan is observing a downward trend in COVID-19 active cases. The Health Ministry said over 90% of the patients have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said 11 people have died while 613 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,201, while the infections are over 290,000. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to nearly 12,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 126,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 95,000 cases. India has reported the highest daily COVID-19 death toll with 1,092 fatalities. With new fatalities, the countrywide toll has jumped to almost 53,000. The Health Ministry said 64,531 new cases were recorded overnight, bringing the country's case load to over 2.7 million. It said there are still over 676,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu states make up 40% of all the confirmed cases. India still remains the third worst hit country from the infection after the US and Brazil. Heavy monsoon rains across India have triggered floods and landslides, killing as many as 868 people across several states. The season lasts from June to September and wreaks havoc across South Asia every year. The flooding in recent days has seen houses swept away and crops destroyed in various regions. Millions have been affected, with many stranded in fast-flowing waters. Rescue teams have been deployed to the worst affected regions. The Indian Met Department has warned that more heavy rains are expected in the northwestern regions of the country. In China's Sichuan province, about 130,000 people have been evacuated after floods hit Yangtze River and threatened a 1,200-year-old Buddha statue. State media said rescue workers used sandbags to protect the 71-meter sculpture as the water submerged its doors for the first time since 1949. The UNESCO World Heritage Site in Leshan City is surrounded by swollen rivers due to heavy rains. The Yangtze Water Resources Commission has declared a red alert, saying water was expected to exceed the safe level by over 5 meters. The Water Ministry said increased water discharge from the reservoirs will see water inflows rise to 74,000 cubic meters per second, the highest since it was built. Southern China has been hit by torrential rains this flood season, affecting over 54 million people since July. Fires are ravaging Brazil's Pantanal, the world's largest wetland. Thousands of species, including jaguars, anteaters, and migratory birds, live in up to 160 square kilometer area. Details in this report.
The Pantanal straddles the borders of Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia, with Brazil containing the lion's share. According to WWF, the region is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, with more than 4,700 plants and animal species. Brazil's National Space Research Agency, INPE, has registered 3,121 fires in the first 15 days of August. This is nearly 5 times higher than in the same period a year ago.
The challenge for us is to fight the fires here in Pantanal. It's a hot environment, very dry, strong winds and high temperatures. We found several convergence points along the way, places where planes and brigades are helping to extinguish the fires.
Government data shows roughly 8,500 square kilometers, or nearly 6% of the Pantanal, burned from January to July. A local newspaper reported that most of the largest sanctuary for the blue hyacinthine macaw parrots has gone up in flames this year.
The impact of the fires is enormous. This is a very large mescal breeding ground, as well as that of other animals. I just found a dead deer and a monkey and a dead monkey. The destruction will be enormous.
At the current pace, fires could approach the all-time record for any month since the records began in 1998. The blazes in the Pantanal comes amid rising concerns about fires in the Amazon, its much larger neighbor to the north.
In Colombia, craftivist Edgar Alvarez is making a statement in Bogota with clay. He is using his artwork to raise COVID-19 awareness and shed light on the lives of millions of Venezuelan migrants. More in this report.
Edgar Alvarez, a Colombian artist, is making a name for himself abroad by seeking to explain current affairs and historical events in an engaging way. His coronavirus caricature can be spotted in nooks of the Colombian capital, not far from where citizens etch out a life in street stalls as a way to make ends meet.
This pandemic has changed us, so it is essential to be able to depict people struggling with it, and that is where I come in to explain it with clay plasticine. It is precisely that, to bring a clear message to people, and that's how it works. With clay plasticine, it is easier to explain certain issues.
Alvarez is hoping to shape popular perception on Venezuelan migrants, both functionally and in abstract. As Colombia is the main destination for Venezuelans fleeing from political, social, and economic crisis under the government of President Nicolas Maduro, he has molded figures to represent people fleeing their homes with what little belongings they can muster on their backs.
I take a lot of photographs of migrants in real-life spaces because that has been important during all of this, to provide a dose of the reality facing these people and in the places where things happen to them.
Alvarez's craftivism has gone global with hundreds of thousands of fans on Facebook and Twitter on his It's Explained Through Clay pages. His 2015 claymation entitled Los Invisibles touched on the problem of homelessness in the U.S. city of Los Angeles.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. U.S. software giant Oracle has entered the race to acquire popular Chinese-owned short video app TikTok. President Donald Trump has vowed to shut down the app unless it is taken over by a U.S. company by mid-September. Oracle said it held preliminary talks with TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance. The company said it is considering purchasing the app's operations in the U.S., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Microsoft has been the lead contender to buy TikTok since it made the announcement earlier this month. ByteDance is opposed to selling any assets beyond those in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The Wall Street stocks have surged with S&P 500 notching a fresh record. Strong quarterly results from the US retailer Target lifted the broader retail sector. The shares of home improvement chain Lowe's companies rose over 1% after beating quarterly estimates. Reeling behind the indices of Nasdaq Composite and Dow Jones Industrial Average also landed in positive territories. Meanwhile, oil prices scaled down as concerns grew that the US fuel demand may not recover quickly amid stalled talks on a stimulus package. In football, Paris Saint-Germain have outclassed RB Leipzig by 3-0 to reach the final of the Champions League at Estadio da Luz. In the first Champions League final, the Parisians will face either Lyon or Bayern Munich on Sunday. Playing in Lisbon, Mourinho's Ángel Di Maria and Juan Bernat struck from the French side. PSG's only other European final appearances include UEFA Cup Winners' Cup finals in 1996 and 1997. The club have gone out in the last 16 for the past 3 years, while Leipzig reached the last 4 only 11 years after their creation. In the National Basketball Association, Blazers beat top-seeded Los Angeles Lakers by 100 points to 93 in the opening game of their Western Conference first-round playoff series in the Disney World. Portland's Damian Lillard continued his hot streak as he scored 34 points, while CJ McCollum bagged 21 points to down the Lakers. Meanwhile, Rockets downed the Oklahoma City Thunder 123-108 in their game as Houston's James Harden scored 37 points. Elsewhere, the 8th-seeded Orlando produced a surprise 122-110 points victory over the top-seeded Milwaukee Bucks. Earlier, Miami defeated the Indiana Pacers by 113 points to 101 with Jimmy Butler hitting a game-high 28 points. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.